It is such a pleasure to be in the presence of Thrity Engineer and Meher Engineer. Thrity, you're the author of Supercoherence, The Seventh Sense, and Supercoherence, The Return to Love, here, which I was absolutely blown away by your work, and I know you've both worked so hard on biolumanetics and the return to love frequencies. So I wanted to start by asking you to define supercoherence for me. We might as well go in deep.
Supercoherence, in a very simple form, is where the laws of love and light align to create the next evolutionary step for the human. And the key word, the root word, is coherence. And we understand coherence in this system differently than it is normally spoken about these days, because everybody is talking about coherence. And we understand it in a very precise way. And what I have to say is that whatever I say is based on the work of 20 plus years, since 1995 to be exact, where we worked with the extraordinary technology called the Luminator and the extraordinary imaging that came with that system. So everything is based on that work. And without VRIC imaging and the Luminator, I couldn't substantiate any of the things that I say. But this interview is not about biolumanetics, because that's a huge topic in itself. But what I just wanted to say was that it's based on that understanding. And that is a very profound and paradigm shift for humans, to have the Luminator come onto Earth and to permit us access to this other level of reality, which we have always kind of known but never been objectified. So coherence in our model, in the biolumanetics model and in the supercoherence model, is based on the understanding of the human being as a light form, as a life form, who constantly emits a signal of light, which is either chaotic or coherent. And that can be imaged. And when the person thinks or makes a statement or has an intent, their photon emission will change from fuzzy to a clear photograph, depending on whether it is coherent or not. So it's a very precise parameter of human superfunction. That is supercoherence for us. In general, people talk about coherence as an alignment of sorts, An alignment is, it's a broad term. Here it's a very precise term. So we could, all the work that we did is based on that model. And it's dependent on thousands of photographs that were taken to substantiate what we do today. Today, we don't do the imaging for various reasons. Because in fact, the job in one sense has already been done, because now the system has gone from biolumanetics to supercoherence. So it's taken a jump and a leap. But that's in essence what I call coherence. And I think it's the next evolutionary step for humans.
Okay. I agree. Meher, you have obviously a background as a GP and have moved into energetics. So from that medical background, but also as somebody who's very privy to the importance and significance of frequency and light emitters, what is your take on coherence?
I would agree with everything that Thrity said. And I would also just talk about the analogy between a light bulb and a laser that's mentioned in Thrity's first book, where a 60-watt light bulb would light a small room, but a 60-watt laser, which is exactly the same amount of power but differently organized, i.e. coherent light, has a completely different potential. And people have likened this to being able to, with a 60-watt laser, being able to put a spot of light on the moon, for instance, or cut through steel. it has a different potential just in the way that that light is organized. And for me, my understanding of supercoherence is when we are able to shift from being a 60-watt light bulb to a 60-watt laser, where we do have different potential available to us. So yeah, ask me the question again if you like.
It's not accessible. That potential is not normally accessible to humans, or it hasn't been. And there are many reasons for that. Primarily because of the load of the subconscious and the unconscious. Human history is a violent history. It's not fun. And who do we glorify? The great conquerors, creating havoc on earth. So the thing is that all of us have experienced trauma. And it's a very big statement, but all of us have experienced it, either in this lifehood or in others. And this trauma is hidden in the human system and prevents us from accessing that laser level, which always exists paradoxically in the same human at the same time. But it's not available. You can have an oil well, which is 100 feet below your house. It's there, but you don't have access to it, and you can't get the money for the oil. So it's that kind of thing. So it's there, but it's not accessible.
One of the things that I read in your book was about the significance and power of emotional energy and how we often waste it. Can you elaborate on that?
I think emotional energy is the joker in the pack and the ace in the hole. It is the most powerful primal force. And humans don't know much about it. Through cultural conditioning, through education, through religious conditioning, emotions are either hidden or put down or, kind of repressed in some way, kind of constricted and controlled. But they're not allowed, or they explode. So either way is not a very useful way to gain the benefit of this extremely exquisite resource, which is the key to ecstasy, the key to heaven is through emotion, and the key to hell is also through the same door, just a slightly different trajectory. So humans don't know how to use emotion. They don't have a clue, and they misuse it, and they squander it. And the result is evident out there in what people do. Either they suppress it or they explode with it. But they don't use it as a resource. It's information coming from a deep and important and authentic part of yourself, which is telling you that you need to do something different. And what we do is we either put the blame on someone else when we feel discomfort, or we swallow it and create havoc in the body instead. So yeah, in this system, we know that emotion is an absolutely vital force to deal with. If you don't deal with it, you will break your head against the wall and create havoc in your life.
Now, it seems like everywhere I look, I see people trying to escape emotion, sometimes desperately. And that was part of my story in addiction. I almost lost my life because I was too afraid to face the fullness of my feelings. Now, why are we all seeking escape so desperately?
Because it's uncomfortable. It's very simple. Everybody wants to avoid pain. So, but the way to avoid pain is to go through it and come out on the other side, or get some help. And as Meher mentioned, as we were talking about it the other day, and she said, but we haven't had the tools. Talking for me, because I did psychoanalysis for 8 years in my 20s, and I walked away from it. It didn't make me happy, so I walked away. I am very self-referring. I've always been self-willed. So it didn't make sense to me because I didn't learn to be happy. So what was the point? What was I doing? And so I'm not a great fan or a believer of talking therapies, though I understand their good intentions. But the point is that the bottom line is, what's the end result? And talking about it is not the answer in my view. It's a partial answer, but it's not the whole answer. It doesn't lead to resolution. And so I think if people understood that emotions are okay, that you're allowed to feel whatever you feel, you're not allowed to act it out, but you're certainly allowed to feel what you feel and to look at it. Because if you don't look, it will find its expression in another unpleasant way. There's no two ways about it. It's a primal force. You cannot avoid it. It's as simple as that, really.
Meher, now Thrity just mentioned suppression of emotion having an impact negatively on your body as a GP. Do you think that that's true?
I have no doubt that it's true. I'm not sure how much of that is informed by my general practitioner medical background, but certainly with the other work that I've done, which is in using mind-body tools, there's no question in my mind that emotions have a very, very powerful effect on the physical level, as well as every other level. And I don't think it's any secret that our emotions create our physiology just as much as our physiology might create our emotions. So it's a feedback loop that can go on endlessly, and it's a cycle that can either be taking us in the direction of repair and wellness and health and happiness, or it can be a cycle that's going in the opposite direction, which is damage, unhappiness, etc. So it's the damage repair cycle of the body is certainly affected very strongly by our internal reality and our emotions. Yeah.
Now, going back to negative emotions, is there an intrinsic value in the negative charged emotion?
Yes, I think so. I think it's a huge amount of energy which is used in a destructive way. But the thing is, what do you do about it? You have to address it in some way which is productive. And just acknowledge. There's a very simple process that I used to follow before with my clients when I saw them. It was just acknowledge the emotion. Don't deny it. Just acknowledge it. Just say, I am absolutely furious about this, or I am really hurt by this, or whatever it is. To acknowledge that intensity is important, because if you don't acknowledge it, it's not going to go away. It will find expression. That is its nature. And so you acknowledge the emotion and you ask a question. What is my need in here that is not being met? And to define that need. It can be asking someone, if you're upset with your brother or your mother or whoever, but understanding that the emotion is there because some need is not being met. So you're learning to understand this troubled part of yourself and to help it along. And then the final thing, which is of course the most difficult thing, is to address that second question with the third, which is asking someone else to do something different, or doing something different internally yourself, or doing something about that feeling so that it feels understood and acknowledged. I think it's like a child. If you don't acknowledge it, do you think it's going to stop crying? It will just cry louder until it collapses in a heap. So it's that primal force. It's not a reasoning force. You cannot reason with emotion. It's not about reason. It's nothing to do with reason. But it's the Achilles heel for so many people who don't know how to handle this part of themselves. And I see very gifted people being destroyed because they don't know this one thing. They don't know how to handle this primal force. And they fall down only because of this one reason. So all their great talents and stuff goes down the tube because of this inability or unwillingness or whatever you care to call it. And it's easily rectified when you have the right tools. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You have an interesting take on addiction. And I'm interested to hear, because I believe that society is an addiction itself, much like the individual can avoid emotion or negative emotion, if you will, from trying to escape it, etc. May it be a substance, a process, a behavior, etc. I believe that shows up on a collective level as well. What are your thoughts on that, and what is your take on addiction?
Addictions always serve a need which has not met in some other way. So it's not a bad thing, and it's not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing. But the thing is, it's not just negative. It does not have to be punished and controlled and stuff, because I don't think you can. But what we have found is that when you change the frequency of the person, the addiction drops away. So what happened? Why? If somebody has been drinking coffee for several years and suddenly decides not to drink coffee, it's not so easy to do. And yet the person can do it and not suffer any ill effects. Why? Or a person gives up smoking this is not to say that everybody does that, but we've seen several people with either, they couldn't drink anymore. Or a couple of hours after holding the frequencies, they couldn't smoke. They didn't want to smoke anymore. Nobody asked them. I never asked a client, don't do this or give that up. It will give you up. And then because that need is met at some other level, some deep level of need has been met. And a frequency shift can do that. That's the elegance of working at the frequency level, beyond talk. Because I can talk to the person and the person will agree with everything that you say and do exactly the opposite when they go home.
I totally have been there and done that.
We've all done that, we've all done that. But when you start acknowledging and working with this deep level of the self, which I have to say, you have to have the right tools to do it. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's available to everybody or anything, but all I'm saying is that these tools are here now on earth and they can be used by anyone. That's their beauty and their simplicity and their power and their elegance, that they can be used by anyone without any ill effects. But the thing is, when you start doing that and your whole field starts reconfiguring and the configuration becomes more coherent, coherence is intelligence, harmony, and order. So whatever is not orderly or not intelligent for the system will leave. You cannot help it. It's a lawful process. So that is my take on addictions. So I never fight them. You cannot fight them.
They just get bigger.
Exactly. Because you've experienced it, so you know. But people try and fight them, and they do use punishment, and they use this aversion, and it actually doesn't really work. It's a hard way to go. And there is deep happiness at some level of the self, which we are desperately trying to get to somehow, in some way. That place where we were always happy, where, as a small child or whenever, or in the Garden of Eden for that matter, So that place is there, and we all long to get to that place, to live in that place, to access that place. And it's somehow not available very easily. So we find it in unpleasant ways, which have catastrophic consequences. But they also give that pleasure and that high and that reaching to heaven. So they do something, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. But it's just that the point of the optimum is not there. And there is a point of the optimum. The optimum is supercoherence. The optimum is coherence. When the system is coherent, it behaves in a coherent manner and in an intelligent manner, which is beneficial to it. So you can't measure coherence in normal ways, but you can measure it in your life. How coherent is your life? Does it make sense to you? And where is it not at its optimum? The tools that the supercoherence system give you is that key to seeing this part of yourself. Not just seeing it, but seeing both parts, seeing the observer and what is happening to you, or what is happening at the level of the personality, or the emotional stuff that is happening. You're able to observe it without being overwhelmed with it. So the part that is being observed and the part that is observing are not the same, though they are part of the same human. So what this gives you is a very clear vantage point. And it's not to be lightly, that's not a small thing.
So can the supercoherent system lead you then to a supreme shift in consciousness?
Yes, that is exactly why I call it the next evolutionary step. Because you cannot do this with struggle. It is not a struggle process. We see all the struggles going on out there. That's at this level. That's at the 3D level. There's a level which is always elegant, always present, and always intelligent, and loving, and accepting. That is also always there in every human, all the time. But we don't have access to it at the personality level. So we think it's not there, and we get lost. When you shift at this level, when you restore coherence, when you restore supercoherence through the frequency tools, it's a different ballgame, because you're not asked to do anything. It's a reconnection to that level through the use of frequency. So it's a frequency shift at the frequency level, at the field level. It's got nothing to do with the physical level per se in a direct way. It affects the physical level, of course it does. But it has to happen there. So that is why these tools are there to create that super alignment with no effort involved for the individual. You don't have to do a mantra, you don't have to do a meditation, you don't have to do a practice. Yes, you have to do a practice, you have to hold the frequencies. And a child can do it, and a 90-year-old can do it, and a criminal can do it. It's for everyone. These are universal frequencies because they affect everyone.
It feels like, I see it with clients, and I have also experienced it myself, where no matter how astute or educated I am around emotional intelligence, I hit a point where I feel like I cannot break through this barrier. What is that?
That's the road of the subconscious. You can't access the subconscious because essentially it's not conscious. And people underestimate the power of the subconscious. Big mistake. I think that's what Bruce Lipton says, doesn't he? It's like 1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind. It is so. And yet, when you have the right tools, it dissolves in minutes. Something that has been there for years and years and years can dissolve in minutes. And the charge around it is just neutralized. I can't explain how it does it, but I can see that it does it.
And you have proof that it's...
We've seen it with clients, It's an absolutely magical process. And it's so elegant because it just dissolves. And in the imaging, you could see it instantly. Because the moment the person held the right frequency, the charge around it, the fuzziness just disappeared. Just like that, on the instant. I mean, it doesn't mean that this happens at the energetic level. It's instant. But in this 3D reality, it manifests also very, very fast. Just giving that person the right frequency to hold. All these frequencies are what are called ultra-high dilution frequencies. So it's a thing which has been reduced to a frequency where there's no physical molecule present. So you can't take it to a lab and say, can you please tell me, what it contains? It will contain water. That is all. So,
can you go into perhaps a more medical description, or maybe I'll ask Meher first and we can go back to you, Thrity. In terms of charge and emotion, what does that mean?
For me, all emotions carry some charge. And that charge can have a beneficial effect on our physiology or a non-beneficial effect on our physiology. Having said that, I don't think there is any such thing as a negative emotion or a positive emotion. It's how we interpret it, and it's to do with our perception. So, for instance, somebody who is very connected to the world of duality may perceive an event as being very negative, and their physiology and their emotional state will reflect that. And somebody who, for instance, is living more in unity consciousness and is more in surrender to the universal intelligence and in acceptance, their perception of witnessing the exact same event will have a very different effect on their emotional reality and thereby on their physiology. The key thing I think about emotional charge is that any event that creates a very high emotional charge often leaves an imprint in our biolight field. And it's a bit like in a computer, every experience that we have is logged in the biolight field. On a computer, when any key that we press on our keyboard is logged on the hard drive. I think we all know that. Similarly, every experience that we have is logged in our biolight field. People also talk about cellular memory, body memory. There are all these ways in which every experience that we've had is recorded in some way. And the key thing about that is that events that have had a high emotional charge are still running in the background. So in that sense, there is no past or future, or there is no, how can I put it? It's beyond space and time, because everything that's happened to us that we think is in the past is still affecting us because it's logged in the field. And that will affect how we perceive whatever it is that's out there, because it goes through this filter of our perception as based on our past experience, which is still current. So I think, this idea that time heals is not necessarily accurate. And in fact, there have been studies done that have shown that adverse childhood events that occurred for people in their childhood are potentially creating physical illnesses. I mean, serious illnesses like respiratory illnesses, apart from the mental health things, also respiratory illnesses, cancers, etc., heart disease, decades later.
It was interesting what you said about the field and its effects on our physiology and health and everything. And one of the things we're looking at is feeding the field. And what are you feeding the field? You get back what you put out.
It's always on. It's never off. Whether we are asleep, awake, conscious, unconscious, that part of us is always alive and present and awake. And so we are constantly dialoguing. The superconscious part of ourselves, which is always awake and present, is constantly dialoguing with the field. And often we have no idea what it is that we are saying, because it's not of our conscious volition, the message that's going out there, it's often the load of our subconscious that is the loudest voice in dialoguing with the field. And when we become more conscious of what is being said, then we have a greater alignment with that more universal intelligence, and we can dialogue in a more coherent, conscious way. And I think this is where the supercoherence return to love frequencies are such a blessing, because they enable us to come into that alignment with a degree of effortlessness and ease that is really quite unique. And they help to dissolve the emotional charge around events. And these events can be that happened 5 minutes ago, or a few years ago, or even from before we were born. So in that sense, they are really unique tools to help us deal with the bringing to neutral, to that balance point, the charge that has built up around living on this earth in this human existence.
We were looking at, defining emotional charge. What is it when you have a charged emotion? May it be polarized, positive or negative or anything? What is going on in your field when that happens?
What is going on is that the pain of that experience is still present, unresolved. That's the bottom line, that the trauma is not resolved, and it will always seek resolution in its own either clear way or in a distorted way. So that charge has a huge impact on your life, and it will inform the choices that you make, whether you like it or not. So it is very important. There's so much stuff today about trauma, but trauma is, there's small trauma and there's big trauma. But there's trauma in everyone's life, whether it's death, disease, divorce, whatever, and or other unpleasant experiences, which normally are not resolved. They're just not resolved, and they hold a vast amount of energy. That energy is not available for creativity. That energy is not available for function. So when you release that energy, not only release it, but to reorganize it so that it becomes neutral, that energy becomes available for useful work, like creativity and functioning well in your life, in your relationships, and everything. It has a huge effect, beneficial effect, and that is because the frequencies allow you to access the most important number, which is 0. It allows it to go to 0. Otherwise, you can talk and you can do all the other things. You will get some resolution, but you will not go to 0. 0 is where the portal is between this dimension and the others, the quantum dimension, for want of a better term. And to reach the miracles of that dimension that are available just for your asking, you have to get to 0. Unless you get to 0, you can't cross that portal. And the frequencies allow you to access that portal just like that, just with the holding. That's what they do. And we see that through the imaging. We've seen that time and time and time again through the imaging. How quickly is the trauma resolved? It just dissolves instantly. It doesn't mean that the person will feel that benefit right away, but we can see that happen in the imaging. The instant that you hold the right frequency, the trauma is gone. You want an example?
Yes, please.
There are 2 different ones.
Okay.
So Meher and I kind of have a thing about it. But I'm going to go with both, maybe, because I've experienced both and I saw the magic of them. And this child had been adopted and didn't know who his father was. And So he had told his adoptive mother to find out somehow. He had met his biological mother one time, and she had refused to see him after that. So what happened was that when he came in, he was very distraught. And what had happened was that his mother, his adoptive mother, had given him some really shocking news about his father, his real father, which I won't go into. I won't go into the exact thing, but it was very, very shocking. And he was totally distraught with that news and very, very angry with his adoptive mother, who had given him the bad news. So I asked him, I said, did you not ask for this news? He said, yes. So I said, then you have to handle it. So how did we handle this? This guy is distraught. He's weeping. He's absolutely furious. And so we did an alignment with his biological mother, with his adoptive mother, and the divine mother. We aligned it. It's a frequency alignment. So when you hold the photographs, the photograph will become incoherent. And then when you hold the photograph, the same photograph with the relevant frequencies, the photo becomes coherent. So that is what we did. And we created that alignment. And all he had was a little vial to put on his wrist, containing a few drops of water with information. He had calmed down completely by the time he left, but that is not the thing. 4 days later, he phoned me. He says, Thrity, I've hit the ceiling. What does that mean? It meant that he was on top of the world. So where did that trauma go? How did it go? What did we do? Nothing and everything. So it's a question of aligning to the right frequency. That is all that is needed to solve a lot of trauma. A lot of very difficult situations can be resolved and dissolved. And then we had another instance, which is a different kind of a trauma. This was a childhood trauma, which he had to resolve. But this was this young woman who had been in the London bombings in 2005. When we met her, it was what, 2017?
I don't remember.
Something like that. She had been exactly by the bus that blew up. And she had seen some very unpleasant things, with limbs flying, etc., etc. And she had been pulled out of the situation. But 10 years down the line, the trauma was, she had done a lot of work. She had done yoga, she had gone traveling, she had done a lot to heal her life. But she still kept talking about it. We were in a little retreat for 2 or 3 days, and she talked about it a lot. So I knew that it's there. It's not gone. And what she said was that even today, after all the work that she had done, whenever there was a loud noise, her body would react. So it's held in the body. It's physiological. And so I asked her, I said, do you want me to help you a little bit, if you like? And she was about to leave, so I had 10 minutes to do this. And I just asked her to go to the place of that place which was when it happened, to feel into it. She was trusting enough to do it. And I said, what's your distress level? The normal way we measure distress levels. I said, where's your distress level from 1 to 10, where 1 is calm and 10 is high distress. She said, something around 9 or something. I don't remember exactly, but it was a very high number. I just gave her the frequencies to hold, the RTLFs, that is, green in the right, pink in the left, and just sat with her. Nothing, no talking. Didn't ask her to describe anything, nothing. Just asked her to stay with it and to tell me when the distress started. Distress is also charge. Started coming down. Within a while, it came down some. Then I gave her, because there was a real shortage of time, I flipped it and gave her the green in the left hand, which calms the system down. That's one of the things. And took away the other one. Again, just for maybe a couple of minutes. And then gave her the exam interview frequency to wear. Another couple of minutes. 10 minutes, the charge had come down from 10 to almost nothing. No talk, no nothing, just holding a few pieces of glass. Big deal.
Was that able then to neutralize the distortion?
Yes. 1 year later, Meher, I didn't go for that retreat. Meher went. And so
I think that's a very key thing, is that a year later, she reported that she'd become aware that when she heard a loud bang, she hadn't had that startle response, which is a very significant change. And it's not a change that, it's not, we can imagine something, because the startle response is a physiological response that is an involuntary response. So that was a very significant change.
It's hugely significant, so profound. And those real life examples, of which I've read both of your books, and there are so many. And I mean, absolutely, the evidence is there in abundance that these frequencies work. So can you talk a little bit about how how the frequencies would neutralize any emotion so that you overcome distortion? I want to hear you sort of speak to distortion a bit.
I think basically everything we see is through a distorted filter. So all of us are creating our reality through these distorted filters. And I call it being born drunk and thinking I'm sober, So if you're born drunk, you don't know what sober is. But if you're sober, you always know what drunk is. So what these do is they restore you to sobriety by touching this part of yourself which is super intelligent. I think this is the key thing that people don't understand, that this body is a miracle. It's a miracle design. And the intelligence that keeps it running is not a small intelligence. It's an immense, it's hard to describe in words, the magnitude of this intelligence, which keeps the 100 trillion cells talking to one another on a continuum and keeping your body in function. What is that intelligence? You can call it God if you like, and it keeps not only you, but the other 7 billion as well, and all the other rest of it. So there is a massive intelligence in the universe. And the frequencies, the SRTLFs, allow you to touch that in a very direct way, to reconnect you there, just by holding them. How do they do it? I have no idea. Why do they do it? I have no idea. But that they do it, I have seen it and seen it and seen it and seen it. Time and time and time, thousands of times now. And people report that. So they are, I call them instruments of grace, because they allow humans access to that level, which in previous times they would say they meditated for several lifetimes. And here it's given to you as an act of grace, so that that love and self-acceptance can open the heart of the human, which has been closed because of suffering and disconnection. And as one of my favorite sayings is by William Blake, he says, when the doors of perception are cleansed, everything appears to man as it is infinite. You get to see the infinite realm. So you're not stuck in that small, painful place anymore. It's not necessary. But you have the opportunity to enter this other place, which is also your birthright, but it's also our responsibility. Does that make any sense?
It really does. I'm interested in taking responsibility for our emotional health and taking responsibility for our own vibration. How do we do that, and why is that important?
I think taking responsibility for our own frequency and coherence and emotional state is such an important thing, because it's from our emotional reactivity that we create and perpetuate the cycle of suffering. And when we take responsibility for that, and when we stop reacting and become more coherent and more loving and compassionate, particularly towards ourselves as well as each other, then we break that cycle of suffering. And I think that emotional coherence is such a powerful and important key to break the cycle of suffering. And I'm going to mention something now that's really close to my heart that I talk about, which is, people talk about carbon footprint, our carbon footprint, but we should possibly more importantly be asking, what is our emotional footprint? Because actually, if our emotional footprint became more coherent and loving and happy, then actually the carbon footprint would take care of itself, because we would all make different choices in how we choose to walk upon the earth.
Absolutely.
So, these are powerful keys. And on this note, if you like, I think the key to healing, and by healing I don't mean just physical healing, I mean becoming more loving, more happy, more creative beings, connected on the planet, then the keys are actually informational keys. They're free. And frequency is another word for information also. So when you have the right frequency or the right combination, then things can come into an alignment with the ease and elegance and grace and with effortlessness that Thrity mentioned.
You've talked a lot about the cycle of suffering. What causes suffering?
Well, very simple. It's a disconnection from who we are. It's a distorted perception of that which we are. And that's what I talk about in the second book, which is that process is a very unique process which became visible only because of the Luminator and VRIC. When we used to put the frequency bottles of just the male frequency cream, dried up cream, which was 14 years old or whatever, and we did it for everybody who came here for the imaging. And the person didn't know what that bottle was, what it contained, and it didn't touch them. So it was 6 inches away. And we take a photograph. And then we put the male frequency and the female frequency, one after the other, for everyone. And pretty much everybody became incoherent with one or the other. Now you tell me, that thing is not touching them, they don't know what it is, and it's creating incoherence in the field. So their sense of perception of their being male or female is distorted. And out of distortion flows more distortion, and more distortion, and more distortion, ad infinitum. That is the cycle of suffering, because we are not connected to our own frequency. If I'm a male or I'm a female, and the female frequency makes me incoherent, what is the meaning of that? So we have to be neutral. We have to be at zero to perceive clearly. I think that is something people find it hard to kind of understand, but it is a very key understanding, because if you're neutral, you're not in this eye or in that eye. You're in the middle, at zero. And the Taoists know that. They have their own understanding of zero, which is here. It's here, it's not here or here. Because both of these are loaded. And they have to come into perfect balance to see through the third, which is zero. And that cycle of suffering is because of that initial disconnection from our own frequency, which is, I think, a catastrophic event for humans. I don't know why it happened, how it happened, when it happened, but that it happened is right there in front of our face. That disconnection. And when you're disconnected from that which you are, what happens? There's only suffering after that. And the moment you rectify it also, which is so simple and easy when you have the right tools, your life becomes a different life. Because it's not disconnected anymore. I can feel I can hold my own resonance. I can hold my frequency. I can see my nonsense as well without being too upset by it, but still addressing it. So holding your own resonance as a male or a female is very important, as also with your relationship with the opposite sex. Because I have to be neutral to both, which means I have to love and accept both, myself and the other. There's no other, of course. I think you know that.
What do you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? There is no other. There is only I. Because if you look at the hologram, the part in the whole and the whole in the part, what is that? There's only I.
There is only the one.
Yeah.
Mm.
If I neutralize my field and manage to get to 0 point, am I affecting the collective?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because a higher frequency, the others will seek to entrain. All of us are seeking that. Whether we know it or not, whether we are conscious of it or not, all of us at some level are seeking that. Because it's our nature to return to perfection. It's our nature to want it. Nobody wants to be unhappy. Nobody's saying, please make me unhappy. I want to be unhappy. They want to be happy. They want to feel that connection with their, for want of a better term, the divine self. Whether you use that term or use another term, is whichever suits you. Because it's not about religion. So I don't want it to be about religion. Even though the Divine Mother is there in her symbolic form, it is not about religion. It is about spirituality in the 21st century. It's not even about prayer. It's simply every act should be a prayer. Every act should be an offering. Well, why is it? Why do you only pray in the church or the mosque or the synagogue? Why? Isn't the universe is holy everywhere? How can it not be? So that's a different understanding. And then from that different understanding, you get a different response and not create suffering through hurting others because they are different or they believe something different or whatever. Humans is to bring back intelligence onto earth. That is breaking the cycle of suffering. I think Buddha said that. He called it ignorance. But of course, this is not the path of renunciation as well. Not have sex, not have food, not touch anybody. It's not that way. It's doing everything, participating at every level, but doing it from a coherent place, from a coherent point of view. That's a different thing altogether.
Beautiful. You said superfunction will be the new order.
When people get coherent, of course, there will be huge burst of creativity. I mean, creativity also comes from discomfort. A lot of creativity comes from discomfort, from addressing discomfort and solving it. You get new things. But there are other ways of also creating, which can probably... That's just my thinking. It's not something I can prove or substantiate, but I can imagine that when people become super coherent, then there is much more love on the planet. Because that is our essential nature. And somehow we got disconnected from it. It's so embarrassing. Sometimes I watch these romantic dramas from the East, Korea and Japan and stuff like that. And it's so hard for people to say, I love you. It's so fearful to say, I love you. You know, they go through all kinds of things to avoid it. Why? Why can't we just say, I love you? It's okay. So there's a lot of cultural conditioning everywhere to stamp on that part of ourselves, which is unfortunate.
Is getting coherent the gateway to a return to love?
It is absolutely that. In fact, when it dissolves family conflicts so sweetly, as long as you start the process. We've got so many case studies of that. You know, that this lady, I mean, she in fact spoke on the phone to us. We had a gathering recently where anybody who owns the supercoherence frequencies or anybody can come and she lives in Scotland. And she described her relationships as family relationships as doomed. That's how she described it. And then it was a complex thing. She had left her husband, or the husband had left, and the daughter stayed with her, and the son was very angry with his mother and went with his father and stuff like that. So everything became very, in her words, toxic and very unpleasant. And then they got the frequencies, they got the SRTLFs and the wellness frequencies, which are just another part of the thing. And the whole relationships, all the relationships changed. So now she says they're better than they ever were, just with wearing the frequencies. And she's given a detailed write-up of, and it took 4 months for what to happen. And the relationship is now as sweet can be. They're not together in the sense of they're not married still, but they are sweet with each other, they are kind to each other, and all the anger and the pain has gone. Where did it go? How did it go? There was no talk. Just wearing a frequency or putting it on somebody's photo. Because they are field, so they are not space-time bound. You can help anybody across the world or in another dimension if you wish.
Well, you've talked about the frequencies taking us beyond the boundaries of the 5 senses. And you talk about the 7th sense. What is the 7th sense?
The 7th sense is, in simple terms, that superintelligence that exists within each one of us. The part that controls the coordinated activity of your 100 trillion cells, that is present. And accessing that through the frequencies, you're accessing the 7th sense. It's not intuition, and it's not the 5 senses. It's got nothing to do with them. It's another level altogether. So that intelligence is reconnected to us with the frequencies. When we hold the frequencies and the photon emission becomes coherent, that is what is happening. You're talking to the 7th sense. You're not talking to the 6th sense. Yeah, you're not talking, nothing to do with the 5 senses. It's gone beyond that. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's available to us all?
That's available to us all.
Am I a superconductor if I can access that? I mean, how does that work?
You are already accessing that because you're however many
It is
trillion
accessing
cells.
you. You are not accessing that. It is accessing you. And because that's the separation. Would you not agree with that?
I think it's a two-way street.
Okay.
And I think that our access to that level is limited, and we don't generally have access to that level, but that level, it resides within us. Maybe that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
So that supercoherent level resides within each of us just by virtue of us having a physical body with how many trillion cells. And that supreme intelligence is what is orchestrating the incredible symphony, if you like, that is each of us. So that intelligence is completely different to our intellectual intelligence, which is very puny, actually, by comparison, if we even want to compare it. So I would say that that level is already a part of us, but is generally, it's almost like access is denied until we have the right keys. And those keys are frequency keys, informational keys that allow us access to this other realm, to this other level of our being.
But that's the seventh sense we're talking about. Accessing is reconnecting to that other intelligence so that it, in a way, you're surrendering your power to that. And then your life becomes a different life.
Part of my journey has been becoming aware of the language of the light. And that's how I happened on this word called sentience. Can you define sentience to me?
Sentience, I call it. That's my way of pronouncing it. I call it sentience. Sentience is, in simple terms, accessing knowledge through feeling. It's the science of feeling. It's not the intellect. That's my definition of sentience. And accessing, in a way, you're accessing a very high level of information when you access it through your sentient self. All living things have sentience. They know themselves. But humans are different. So accessing knowledge through feeling as opposed to thinking would, for me, be the defining factor for sentience. What do you think?
I love your definition. I think it's absolutely an intelligence beyond the senses that allows us to resonate with the universe.
Yes, it's a feeling universe.
And what science is telling us more and more, we're not thinking machines that feel.
We are feeling machines, of course. Of course. And science has not been very smart for a long time, so it has very great points and has very great limitations.
Meher, can I ask you to define sentience, please, as well?
For me, sentience is very much about the feeling level. And it's about the sense that connects us, that's beyond the five sensory reality, that connects us to the universal intelligence. And it belongs to the realms of emotions, feelings, which are also the language, if you like, in which the universe dialogues with us. And like Thrity said, the universe is sentient. It's consciousness. And it's dialoguing with us, in my opinion, through the language of emotions and feelings, as well as sometimes through the intellect, but that's a different level of understanding and expression. And I'm not sure where quite inspiration fits into what I'm saying. But yeah, I would define it like that.
It's a feeling intelligence. The universe is a feeling intelligence. And no science talks about that. Doesn't talk about a feeling intelligence. It wants to know the particles and this, but it doesn't understand that it's a feeling intelligence. It understands feelings. So therefore, if it understands feelings, it has feelings. How can it not?
That's where my journey led me. I realized, gosh, light bulb moment. It's the language of the light is emotion. And that's when I thought we need to redefine this and put this on the map. We're all running around escaping the one thing that's the interface to the next level.
That's right. But humans are good at that. But they are also smart. They also go through the problems and come out with creative solutions. So I have great faith in that there is sufficient creativity still to unfold, to take us out of the nonsense that we do.
How is emotional energy misused and misunderstood?
No, I think emotional energy, which is the most beautiful, powerful energy that we have access to, is grossly misused and misunderstood, and suppressed and constricted and controlled, and that is not to our benefit. So there's no education that that shows us how to do that. And our parents are not good examples either because of the cultural and, conditioning that is there all over the world. It's not, maybe in some indigenous tribes it's not, I don't know. But we don't have a good history of handling emotions well, and especially powerful emotions of anger or fear or whatever, And yet that same thing is a resource. So I call it anger as ally and fear as friend. So you can take those same things which can be very destructive and turn them around into something completely different if you know how to do it. And the education there should be an element of that. I think that is slowly coming when people are talking of mindfulness and stuff like that. But it's a slow process.
Yes.
It can be speeded up.
That's what I'm hoping this project will do.
Yes.
Meher, you
I was just going to say that emotions are enormous power. They contain enormous power and force, potentially. And anything that embodies enormous power is open to being misunderstood and misused. In addition to that, I think there's also been a real lack of awareness and acknowledgement of how powerful the force of emotions really is. And I think there's also a lot of fear around emotions because we cannot control them in the way that we may be able to control our thoughts, for instance. And there is a sense in which we try to control our emotions via the intellect, but it's a bit like trying to mix oil and water. They're two different beasts, if you like, and they don't necessarily go well together. Our emotional reality will certainly affect our thoughts, but our thoughts have a much more limited impact on our emotional selves. And when we consider that there's so much power in there, literally to create heaven on earth or to create absolute destruction, it's not surprising that there's so much fear around emotion. In addition to that, we haven't actually had very good mind-body tools until fairly recently. I mean, the last few decades, yes. And you could say that with homeopathy and stuff like that, going back a couple of 100 years even, and certainly the acupuncturists, they talk about different emotional states. But in the West, certainly, there has not really been an understanding of the importance of emotional reality and emotional power, nor have there been adequate mind-body tools for being able to address emotions when they're out of balance. It's not so easy to do. And so when there's something, it's no good knowing that, if I want to acknowledge that I'm really angry, for instance, I need to know how I can channel that energy, that force and energy, in a constructive way, so that it's not creating havoc either outside or within my own body. But now I think we are being given more and more tools, mind-body tools, that are helping us to be able to deal with the emotional reality that's inside. Now, I think there's a real big difference between being able to override our emotions by choosing mentally to focus on something more pleasant and better. But that doesn't necessarily clear the programs that are running in the background that are creating the disturbing emotions in the first place. And I think it's really important to be aware of the difference between those two things. You might feel the same, but one is going to require you the effort of constantly keeping a mental focus on something that we experience as positive. And the other is actually changing the programming that resides in the field. And things like EFT can help with resolving stuff. And obviously for us, the frequencies, and particularly the SRTLFs, the return to love frequencies, help us to resolve what's there. So there's relief and there's resolution. And they're not the same thing. And then we would say that the next step after resolution is then realization, which is a whole other level.
What is the difference between an imprint and a blueprint?
The blueprint is the template of perfection, the exquisite design, the creator for what, what the creative principle or the extreme intelligence created this exquisite design for the human. So that is perfect function, is the template. That's the blueprint. The imprint is that every single experience that we have is recorded in the field. That leaves a mark in the field. And it depends on what that mark is, whether that experience was painful or pleasurable to the experiencer or who has the field. So it's a totally different, unique set of experiences and responses, of each of which are recorded and registered and held in the field. That's the imprint. And that imprint is what will shape perception and inform the choices that you make, which will always, to some extent, be distorted from what the blueprint. The blueprint is not the imprint, and the imprint is not the blueprint. They're two really different. So what we seek to do is to clear the imprint so that it becomes closer to the blueprint. So function becomes, we are enhancing function by clearing the imprint of incoherent emotional information. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Is the return then to my blueprint alignment?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's aligning with that perfect parameter, if you want, of function.
Then returning to my blueprint, is that the truth of who I really am?
Yes, absolutely.
Do feelings create our reality?
Yeah, they do. You cannot bypass feelings. Feelings are to do with emotions and perception. So learning more about them self-reflection and self-discovery will shape perception and will shape the choices that you make. So feelings are super important. Disregarding them is very, very unwise and counterproductive. And we don't teach children how to do that.
Why is this not taught in schools?
Because adults don't know how to do it. So how can they teach the children? We've been doing nonsense for the last few thousand years. So how can we do it different? So it's a cycle of suffering that's gone on for a few thousand years. It's not day before yesterday. So the moment you were disconnected from that frequency, that was when it started. So that was when Adam was ejected from the Garden of Eden. That's it.
Are we standing on the brink of a great awakening?
I think these kind of tools, the Illuminator coming to Earth for me was the greatest paradigm shift in history as far as I'm concerned. Because it allowed us to see this level in real terms, which was not visible to us. So we could conjecture it. The great rishis and sages and stuff could meditate for hundreds of years or whatever. But what about the rest of humanity? What about the other 99%? How are they going to do it? Until these great tools came on Earth to help.
I thought of another question related to intuition. Psychics and channels and those that can tap into the field, if you will, and predict what might happen in the future or read perhaps different energy levels from different entities. What are they tapping into?
They are tapping into the field, but my caveat is only this, that it goes through a personal filter. So I would choose very carefully who I go to. Because they are. So many of them may be absolutely authentic and they're not telling lies or anything like that, but there is a personal filter there. And it's very difficult to go past the personal filter.
I think another really important point is which part of the field are they accessing? Because the field is not, there are many different aspects of the field. Whether you see them as layers or octaves or whatever, there are many, many different aspects of the field. And there are distortions there as well. So the question is, which aspect or level are they in connection with? And that will also determine the kind of information that is being accessed. So, for instance, for us, connecting with the frequency of that intelligence that is represented by the Divine Mother photograph is one where there is pure love and unconditional love. It's also quite a tough love. But that is a level that, for me, bypasses a lot of other levels of the field. So I think that's something to be cognizant of when we engage in connecting with other dimensional realms.
You've just reminded me, I think we're all channeling
Absolutely.
all the time. So what you said made me think, well, what am I channeling as I sit here?
It's like we are each a radio station unto ourselves, aren't we? We're broadcasting and receiving.
What is coherent intent?
I think that the incoherent intent is, it's like incoherent light going in so many different directions. So it's not a clear intent. Whereas a coherent intent is an aligned intent. Whereas, say, an incoherent intent is, there's an old saying which says the way to hell is paved with good intentions. Why? because we don't see clearly what is it. So where the different aspects have to align, and then you have this, in your own case, you have this great task unfolding in front of you. That's a coherent intent. You can't do it without it, because you will have to give up. What would you do otherwise? Would you do anything else? No. That is a coherent intent. It's an aligned intent where you will put everything behind that. And it's worth doing it for that. That is a coherent intent. If it's not coherent, it will fall apart. You'll get results that you may not like or want, or, get mixed results and stuff like that. Whereas when it's a coherent intent, the universe opens its doors. The doors fly open because it's aligned. It's a frequency thing.
And another way to, when we were talking about this earlier, another way to define it is when there is an alignment with all of us. So the belly, the heart, the head, and the soul. And when all of those parts of ourselves are in alignment and integrated, that's a coherent intent.
And can we live from a heart-based intent? Can we set our intentions to perhaps create a reality that's more positive for us to experience?
Intending to live from the heart is, I think, what we would all like to do more of. I think most of us would like to do that. The only caveat to that is that what is expressed through the heart is determined by what resides in the belly and the subconscious self, and also what comes through the superconscious self. But living through, I would say living through the heart rather than living from the heart. Because when the heart's intention is not supported by the subconscious, the load of the subconscious, and there is not a strong foundation that is not riddled with fear and limiting beliefs, then the heart can open fully. But without that strong foundation, it's not safe for the heart to open fully, and it's certainly not safe for it to stay open fully. So I would say that, of course, it's great to have that intention, but having that intention is not enough without doing the work to clear the load of the subconscious.
Time. You wrote that time is condensed in coherence.
I think when we were reading Mei Wan Ho's stuff again, it was about, she defines coherence as being effortless action. And it's when you're out of that coherence, then there is resistance and things take longer. And I wonder whether that's what this was referring to.
No, because the thing is, when the system is coherent, it's a never-ending loop of perfection, if you like. So you won't get old or you won't die, basically. But when we are out of coherence, that is when there is entropy or loss through time. So coherence is again the key, and quantum coherence that she talks about. I used to love Mei Wan Ho. I'm so sorry she is not there anymore. She was a great, great, great lady and a great scientist. Scientists that I revere, I love science, and I also know its huge limitations.
Yes. And that's something that I'm trying to bridge, because we are speaking to some scientists who are confirming what you say and what we're coming to realize.
Yeah. And as far as synchronicities goes, again, it's an alignment again. So when your intent is coherent, you have an aligned intent, the universe has no choice but to open its doors. And that's when you get all these crazy synchronicities, which you could not plan if you tried. So the universe is intelligent and coherent. And when you're aligned with it, all the doors fly open. That's called synchronicity.
That's certainly what I've experienced in the making of this document.
Exactly. You lived it, so you know. For most people, when the thing about, I think that one of the main things is that we look at things from outside and think we understand them. And that is a major error. Until you experience it, you don't know what it is. And people have all sorts of opinions about things they know nothing about, because they've read somewhere or they've done this. And I'm sure I'm guilty of that too. But I have the sense that if I want to find something that is extraordinary, I will go and experience it and check it out. Then I know whether to accept it or not. Whereas most people don't do that. They have all sorts of opinions. And then looking at from the outside, looking at things from the outside does not tell you what is really in there. When looking at from the outside and looking at from the inside are two different views and two different experiences. And a lot of scientists make that mistake too, because they think they know.
Is it really all about love at the end of the day?
At the end of the day, of course. Absolutely. There's nothing else.
At the beginning of the day, at the middle of the day, at the end of the day. Yeah.
That's why we have something called the Return to Love movement, which is not written in either of the books. And the Return to Love movement is for transformation of the planet, if you like. And because you can use the field tools because you cannot resist, the frequency is frequency. It's not a resistible force. It does what it's meant to do, and it does it regardless. So what we show people how to do is, if you take it through the field, the person may not feel anything. It's not a feeling thing then, but it's a reconnection. So if you imagine yourself holding the frequencies, and I think for a few months you need to actually hold the frequencies and project it to the person in front of you. Give them the green in their right and the pink in their left and the Divine Mother on their heart. And that's it. Nothing more and nothing less. You've reconnected them. Because the field is the field. It is powerful. And we know because we've done so much imaging, we know what happens with the field. It's instant. So that's another way of transforming, because that's from the top down or from the inside out. You're giving them the key, which they may or not have. So that's the return to love, which can spread. It's like a chain reaction. So that's the return to love movement. How simple is that? And how powerful?
I think that is a beautiful place to stop. And I'm so grateful for your time and your wisdom. And I feel very uplifted and coherent from this exchange. So I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.